Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Hello and welcome to today's event, Cultural Voices from Arts and Heritage at COP27. My name is Shabnam Inandu, and I'm Associate Professor and Director of the Heritage Resources Management Program and Associate Dean of Strategic Initiatives in the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences at Athabasca University. I'm speaking today to you from Treaty 6 territory, traditional lands of many First Nations and Métis peoples. I recognize these territories' significance for the Indigenous peoples who live and continue to live upon it. I acknowledge Indigenous peoples for their stewardship of the land, honor the ancestral heritage and gifts of the Indigenous peoples, and give thanks to them. I would also like to recognize all the Indigenous communities that we are reaching out today as part of this virtual event. I pay respects to elders and knowledge holders and knowledge keepers, past, present, and emerging. So this event is part of a series of events being organized by Carleton University, the University of Montréal, and Athabasca University as part of an initiative called Just Transitions, Heritage Education for Climate Adaptation, JT-HECA, as we call it. These three universities are the Canadian academic members of the Climate Heritage Network. Climate Heritage Network, or CHN, is a global network with the aim of advancing culture-based climate action by emphasizing the cultural dimensions of climate policy through coordination and cooperation among its members. So I would like to take a moment now and introduce the members of JT-HECA Organizing Committee. So if I ask you, please wave when I call your name. So Judy Larmer, I don't know if she has joined us back, but she'll be here soon, I hope, from Athabasca University. Claudine Diom, University of Montreal. Susan Ross, Carleton University. Laurie Smith, Carleton University, and Mario Santana Quintero, Carleton University. Thank you, everyone. So we are so excited you are able to join us today and hear from our esteemed panelists, the Honourable Patricia Bovey, Sharon Morin, and Alison Tickell. My colleague Judy Larmer hopefully will properly introduce our panelists shortly. So as you may know, the 27th session of the Conference of the Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, COP27, took place in November 2022 in Egypt. The Conference of Parties on Climate Change, like the other conferences of parties on biodiversity and desertification, happen at different levels of governance. Besides the official gatherings and meetings of the world leaders, ministers, and the national government delegations, members of civil society, businesses, NGOs, international organizations, and the media also attend the official side events and exhibits and unofficial happenings and events. There are also opportunities for online engagement at COP meetings and other events taking place at the same time around the world. So back to COP27. As Climate Heritage Network noted, for the first time, the parties to the UN Climate Convention have acknowledged the critical linkages between cultural heritage and climate change. This is mainly because of the efforts of CHN's Culture at COP27 Working Group and thousands of arts, culture, and heritage actors and advocates. We wanted to learn more about the important work by culture voices at the 2022 UN Climate Conference. And for this very reason, today we have gathered here to hear firsthand from our panelists as COP27 participants who made sure cultural voices from arts and heritage were front and center of discussions. So before I turn it over to Susan Ross for her remarks about the work of JT-HECA, I just wanted to quickly share a few housekeeping notes. This session, as you notice, is being recorded, and the recording will be uploaded to the JT-HECA website. We'll put the link in the chat. Please keep your camera off if you're not speaking, and make sure you are on mute. Click the microphone option on your screen so it has a red line through it. And please feel free to put your questions in the chat as we will be monitoring the chat function. Please use your real name when you are asking questions so Lori, my colleague, can read your name and question out loud after we have heard from our panelists. So we'll have time for Q&A, and Lori will moderate the Q&A and read your questions. So without further ado, I turn it over to you, Susan. Thank you.
Thank you, Shabnam, and good morning, afternoon, evening to all attendees. I'm speaking to you today from Ottawa in the unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory, where Carleton University is located and where I am so grateful to live and work. As you've already heard, today's event's part of Just Transition's Heritage Education for Climate Adaptation. Back in June 2022, we held the first of the JT-HECA events, an online Athabasca University forum on knowledge areas for climate adaptation. But just what is Just Transition's Heritage Education for Climate Adaptation? As Shabnam has alluded to, this started as an initiative of academic institutional members of the Climate Heritage Network that are working in Canada. And our objectives in JT-HECA are to bring together educators in heritage conservation to better define the contributions our field can bring to climate issues, including mitigation, adaptation, and transitions towards climate justice. The Climate Heritage Network is a sweeping network of arts, cultural, and heritage organizations, all focused on tackling climate change. This network includes academic departments from across the arts, humanities, sciences, and engineering. And more than 60 institutions of higher education were represented in the registered participants for the Athabasca University Forum this past June. So in a series of 4 panels that in June that focused on knowledge areas for climate adaptation, we heard from experts about key concepts, methods, and resources that can help transform our work as heritage educators in transitions towards changing times. Our invited panelists spoke about climate impacts and heritage vulnerability, urban and building resilience and adaptation, materials resource reuse and equity, climate justice, and Indigenous knowledge and governance. Importantly, these panels helped remind us of strengths in knowledge areas while identifying gaps. In the heritage context, improving existing practices is valued, but we recognize increasingly that we are at a crossroads of shifting values, which, however, increases opportunities to transform critical relations that have been defined too separately. We have seen that young people represent a powerful force, and we need to use iterative, reflective, and reactive learning to support new roles. We will need to expand how we use our connections to communities to make essential links and support greater responsibility in our actions, while being humble about what we need to learn from those often left out of how we have looked at heritage and climate to date. So these June events, which are very rich, were recorded, and the recordings are available on our website along with other resources. Information about today's events, as Shabnam mentioned, will also be located there. And I look forward to hearing from today's speakers about culture at COP27. Thank you. I think it goes over to Judy now. Shabnam, I think Judy's still not able to unmute.
Judy, we cannot hear you. Okay, I think, so we have a backup plan. I have Judy's notes for the introduction, so I take it over. Thank you, Judy. It's now my privilege and great pleasure to introduce our panel speakers. So I will read the introductions, all of them together, and we'll turn it over to Senator Bovey. Our first speaker is the Honourable Patricia Bovey. Senator Bovey has had a distinguished career in the arts as gallery director, art historian, professor, and arts and culture management consultant. As an independent senator from Manitoba, appointed in 2016, she has worked on many issues to ensure the voices of arts and culture is heard in the Senate and in every sector of society. Recipient of many awards and honors, Senator Bovey is a former chair of the University of Manitoba Board of Governors, She is a past member of the boards of the National Gallery of Canada and the Canada Council for the Arts, and a Federal Museums Task Force member. Western Voices in Canadian Art, Senator Bovey's long-anticipated book, will be launched on February 21st in the atrium of McKenna Robinson Booksellers Grand Park, Winnipeg, in Manitoba. Streamed live on YouTube. So congratulations on your publication and welcome, Senator Bovey. Our next speaker is Sharon Morin, and we're hoping that she'll join us momentarily. But Sharon is a knowledge keeper from the historic Native community of St. Albert, Alberta. Growing up, Sharon was taught and mentioned in traditional knowledge, politics, and culture by many elders, knowledge keepers, and community activists. Working alongside her mother, Canadian Senator, the late Velma Shelley-Fu, she established the Michif Cultural and Resource Institute, known also now as Michif Cultural Connections in St. Albert. Following a 20-year career in museums education, Sharon is now the Environment Project Coordinator with the Femme Otipemsiwak, Women of the Metis Nation. Sharon works on projects related to climate, biodiversity, and honoring Mother Earth. Okay, I don't see her here, but let's move on to our third panelist, Alison Tickell. Alison comes to us from the UK, an accomplished musician. Alison, in 2007, founded and is CEO of Julie's Bicycle, a nonprofit company helping the music industry reduce its environmental impacts. Julie's Bicycle is acknowledged as a leading organization. It bridges sustainability with the arts and culture, extending its reach from performing and visual arts to heritage and wider creative and cultural policy communities. Alison has been on many British advisory and awarding bodies and has herself received prestigious awards. In 2021, Alison became a lifelong Ashoka Fellow, joining the world's largest network of social entrepreneurs committed to championing social good and innovative new ideas to transform society systems and improve lives around the world. Welcome, Judy. I really want to thank Judy for preparing this brief bio for us. Thank you so much, Judy. And I turn it over to you, Senator Bovey. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you, Shabnan, and thank you, Judy. And what a wonderful honor this Saturday morning to be able to revisit the deliberations last November and try to put them in a context that I hope will build on where we are and where we aren't and provide some challenges going forward. So thank you so much for inviting me to speak. And I am speaking this morning from the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people in Ottawa, but I herald and live in Treaty 1 territory, the home of the Dakota, the Cree, the Oji-Cree, and the homeland of the Metis Nation. So it's a real honor to be working and living in these various territories. I think what you're doing today is highlighting not only the critical crisis, but I hope underlining the responsibility we all must take in the arts and culture sector. Must take responsibility, we must take action. And I have to say, I'll say right off the cuff, I don't believe either at COP27 or now are the Arts and Culture Center rightly, arts and culture community rightly at the front and center of the climate change issue. I think tremendous work is being done. I really, really applaud the Climate Heritage Network, and I hope that bandwagon grows because I think it needs to grow. And there is a but. So as we talk about the takeaways regarding arts and culture and heritage at COP27, I do think it presents serious challenges for us all. It was a great honor for me to be part of Minister Guilbeault's, Minister of the Environment's COP27 delegation to Sharm el-Sheikh last November. It was my first COP, and it was also my first attendance at such a large conference, one with 40,000 of one's closest colleagues in attendance. It was impressive. It was inspiring, it was frustrating, and it was concerning simultaneously. I believe the acknowledged role of arts and culture there was far too small, though there were pockets of very exciting discussions which moved the needle forward regarding the essential role that the cultural sector can and should play in this global issue. I want to applaud too the work and the comments and the presentations given by Canada's Indigenous delegations at COP27. They were particularly impressive and convincing. And if Sharon's online, Sharon, it was a delight to work with you there. And I also want to say how impressed I was with what the young Canadian Indigenous participants did. They gave me hope. They gave me big hope. My concern is, how do we get to that hope? So having worked with the Arctic and Inuit artists over many years, I do draw solace from how, despite their vulnerabilities, Inuit people have managed, quote, to journey through weather and climate with their resilient strategies, such as cultural adaptation, material innovation, and social cooperation, to mitigate the effects of both environmental and social change, end quote. I believe the rest of the world has much to learn from our Arctic. That path was highlighted by the British Museum's 2020 exhibition, Arctic Culture and Climate, and its attendant publication. The Senate of Canada's 2019 report, Northern Lights, a wake-up call for the future of Canada, too, brought forward recommendations regarding climate change and environmental needs. And they included, quote, support community-driven environmental conservation efforts, to recognize the central role of co-management bodies in the Arctic when proposing environmental conservation initiatives, and to ensure collaborative governance in environmental decision-making, end quote. The need to understand and collaborate with Indigenous knowledge in Western science approaches was central to our work as a Senate committee, and I believe it remains central today. Culture plays an important role, an essential role in that, and our arts and culture sectors must enhance those collaborations and bring the results forward. Today, I'm delighted to share some of my COP27 takeaways, reflections, and experiences, and the very real challenges we have as a cultural community in light of contemporary climate realities. The climate challenges are real, they are urgent. We in the arts and culture and heritage community have a responsibility to be involved, to lead, and to provide solutions. UNESCO and national heritage sites around the world are being severely compromised, many being devastated by the effects of drought, fire, acid rain, and resulting material degradation. I need not underline what the climate crisis is. You know that. You know rising temperatures affect every part of the world. You know that rise is 3 times as high in the Arctic, causing far faster ice melts than expected even a few years ago. You know approximately 40 of Canada's Arctic communities are threatened with being submerged and becoming extinct. You know the impact of increasing carbon footprints. You know the effects of deforestation at human hands in our Canadian West Coast forests, the Amazon rainforests, and more. You know about the resulting mudslides. I need not relay details of global devastation from fires, floods, and temperature extremes. But I and we do need to ask questions. I also want to throw down a gauntlet for arts and culture, heritage, and museum sectors to fulfill their role. In dealing with this crisis, that role is significant, including sharing expertise and research, presenting solutions, educating audiences, and raising public awareness for the need for societal action in every part of our lives. For all of which we in the museum sector and heritage sector have the collections, the research, the knowledge, and the audiences. So I ask, where is that sector? I know in isolated organizations, many isolated organizations are astutely pulling their weight, but I'm looking for all parts of our community to do that. And I'm wondering how we motivate them. So on my arrival at Sharm el-Sheikh, I knew artists had done much to raise awareness through their art and their protests over decades, alone with Greenpeace, and as part of organized demonstrations against first growth clear cutting in British Columbia. Having followed their work for decades and monitored the state of heritage sites deterioration, I was armed and ready to engage in Sharm el-Sheikh, or so I thought. You can imagine my surprise in an interview with a number of Egyptian press on day one, when I noted to them the extent of climate change on heritage sites. They seemed surprised. It was only when I mentioned the effect on the pyramids that that press took note. I knew then that my task during the 2 weeks would be far greater than I had thought on departing from Winnipeg. My key questions became, why was there not a cultural stream within COP27 in the blue or green zones? Why was culture not part of a holistic approach to the issue? Why had culture never been mentioned in any prior COP declaration? And why, once again, was culture relegated to its silo, the doors of which were to be opened only when others wanted? That, friends, is not enough. We as the creative sector must be there, actively engaged, showing concrete leadership. We have creative ideas. We have knowledgeable voices. We have the tools to be heard. Do we have to force our inclusion on this critical issue locally, at political levels, and internationally all at the same time? Yes, we do. Did we move the cultural climate needle during COP27? In week one, the international heritage and culture sectors were not allowed to meet on site. Thus, we met off-site for a full day at the Sharm el-Sheikh Museum. Song, drama, film, and visual art conveyed both the need for engagement and the scope of possible engagement. The discussions and performances that day were inspiring, and we connected from all parts of the globe. And the work that day became a rallying cry for creative sectors from various parts of the world to engage actively at the center of debates. We were determined to have a solid session on site in week two, and to ensure that culture was part of the final declaration. Week two did bring a substantial change. There were several small sessions on site with few attendees that looked at what has been and is being done in galleries and museums, and with some current built heritage goals. Some Indigenous sessions also focused on cultural inputs into climate realities and change. Going forward, I believe all those initiatives need to be brought together as best practices. That, colleagues, for me, is challenge number one. I suggest starting locally. Ideas and actions that we heard about at COP27 can quickly expand globally. And I think there are several specific initiatives, their results and public accountability, which can be expanded as well. Boise, Idaho, for instance, has a deconstruction and demolition material and waste management plan, which calls for the recycling of all materials from building demolition sites. And they have set up sites for the recycling of these materials. The Smithsonian Science Museum, we learned, has inaugurated a number of truly interesting practices within their, quote, life of a sustainable climate change initiative, end quote. They are collecting new data about the changing planet, implementing holistic conservation, mounting strong education programs about why and how sustainable solutions to climate change can benefit us as individuals and nature as a whole. They are working globally. I believe Canadian museums should take note and follow suit actively, and I would hope the Canadian Museums Association will lead the way. The Smithsonian, like our Senate Arctic study, is also working with Indigenous people, including those in Alaska. Their research is significant and their partners globally are impressive. I want Canadian museums to engage more actively than they have been able to or done to date. So where are Canadian museums on that trajectory? Not far enough at the moment, I fear. The Canadian Museums Association must promote the urgency of this and push for action now, and funders should insist on such initiatives. They can be implemented alongside current initiatives for reconciliation, and these issues do indeed connect. The culmination of week two was a successful request by our group for a session on site. The COP Egyptian presidency said if 75 delegates signed on, they would allow such a session to take place in the blue zone. That happened on the last day, and Alison, I congratulate you for the work you did to make that happen. Princess Dana of Jordan moderated. Ministers from Egypt, Jordan, Tonga, and climate heritage specialists from various parts of the globe participated. I believe this will be the first of many central COP exchanges. Further, culture was recognized in COP's final document of COP27, and loss and damage funds were agreed to. So what are my five high-level takeaways? 1, creative minds must be engaged in developing solutions to stall or reverse climate change and its effect on humanity, even if we have to force the inclusion of our sector at the leadership discussion tables. If we don't insist, it's obvious to me no one else will. Canada's creators have the insights, the knowledge and ability to make positive change if they are included. Secondly, creators must present their work on climate change, their films, plays, concerts, visual art, performance pieces, and more. And they need financial support and institutional partnerships to do so and to be able to spread their insightful thoughts as to this world's crisis. So I say here, enter Canada's museums and arts organizations. Thirdly, arts and culture and their import in determining who we are, the soul of our communities, the soul of our humanities, our places and livelihoods, that all must be taught in schools and be taught with honesty. Arts and creativity have been cut from our curricula far too long, and thus the impact and knowledge of arts and culture and creativity and their effect have been minimized or erased. Relevant discussions in curriculum will necessarily include societal issues like climate change and the essential role culture says. And as a side, because of age, I have to retire from the Senate in May. And while the federal government cannot engage in curriculum because that is a provincial responsibility, wait till my retirement and we'll pick this flag up. Fourthly, and these are not in any order of priority, they're all equal. Fourthly, museums must step up to the mark. I think they've been followers for too long, and now they must lead and step outside their box. Museums must change in order to fulfill their societal roles and to have sustainable, meaningful futures. Building on their core mandates to embrace new paradigms, museums must understand and use their collections, exhibitions, public programming, and outreach in new ways. As society's trusted leaders, while stewarding the material, natural, scientific, and creative past and present, museums have the opportunity and responsibility to change public awareness in today's rapid and drastic paradigm shifts, including climate change. They must lead by example too, and cut their carbon footprints. The 2021 UK Gallery Climate Coalition's conference, Decarbonizing the Art World, agreed to adopt a step-by-step action plan using the carbon calculator designed for the UK for the art industry. I think we should use it too. Galleries and museums do have the research, the collections held in public trust, the knowledge, audiences, and the ability to tell stories and make a difference. Remember, colleagues, families go to museums together, they do not go to school together. We must use these strengths to present not only the histories and current realities, but society's threats and their solutions. In the Senate chamber, I asked Environment Minister Guilbeault how and if he intended to work with artists in the cultural sector in meeting his climate change goals. His response was an unwavering yes. The former Minister of Canadian Heritage and now Environment Minister, he knows the important role we in museums, arts, culture, and heritage play, and he is engaging with us. So what can museums do? Expand climate change science awareness. The impacts on lives and communities are significant, but we must also set an example. How do we work? What materials do we use in our exhibitions? Do we break down display cases or reuse and share them? How do we organize and ship touring exhibitions? Are we attentive to routes and modes of transportation, minimizing carbon footprints? Do we use digital media to its fullest effect? And what do we serve in our cafes? Fifthly, Canadian funders should employ the accountability toolkits developed by UK's Julie's Bicycle, and I applaud you, Alison. Your toolkits are used by arts and culture funders in the UK to great effect. Organizations there must respond to questions regarding their climate accountability. Julie's Bicycles initiative might force our organizations to wake up more. Funders like the Canada Council for the Arts and provincial funders should access these tools. I gather they have seen them and they are supportive. Now is the time to act. A recent Senate exhibition project, Visual Voices, which presented photographs by Edward Bertinsky and Roberta Bondar, focused on climate change. Though it was a small exhibition that I coordinated, it did highlight the issue for my Senate colleagues and the visiting public. My dream, coming out of COP27, I want my professions to combine their initiatives to make sure reversing climate change is at the forefront and fully understood by all of society. Indeed, another important step in linking arts and culture throughout society, I think, is my declaration respecting the essential role of artists and creative expression in Canada, which passed the Senate unanimously and is now before the House of Commons. Environment issues is one of those critical links within that piece of legislation. Only by pulling ourselves together with such collaborations and understanding will we be able to fulfill our civic responsibilities now and for future generations and for the health of the natural world around us. So I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Bovey. Judy, did you want to try and see if you're technically unmute? Did you want to unmute yourself? You can't hear you, sorry. Yeah, so thank you very much for this insightful remarks, Senator Bovey. I think I will turn it over to you, Alison, to take us to your presentation and just give us a moment to share the presentation, please.
That's all right. I'll start.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Senator Bovey. That was characteristically really inspirational and really comprehensive. I'm going to try and add some value, but forgive me if I don't, because that was really a fantastic presentation, not just of the work that you've been doing, but also of the issues at large. So first of all, thank you very much for having me. I feel really honoured to be part of this conversation. And also very grateful to Canada. I'm going to address a couple of the points that you made, Patricia, the challenges to culture, which I feel are very, very are really urgent. But just to kind of say that we do have some super partnerships with colleagues in Canada. We've been talking and friends with colleagues in Canada for a good decade. And there's a lot now that's beginning to happen that's really beginning to rise to the challenge. Not that it's enough, because as you beautifully described, Senator Bovey, there is so much to be done. So a little bit about myself. My name is Alison Tickell. I'm a white woman. I'm in my late 50s. I've got blondish hair and I'm wearing glasses, and I'm speaking from Oxford, England. And it's about 5 o'clock, 4:30 in the afternoon here. I set up Julie's Bicycle, a little bit about that first, some 15 years ago. So quite a long time, because even then it was very clear, two things were very clear to me. First of all, that the climate crisis was fundamentally a cultural crisis. It was a crisis in values, in how we frame the world, in what we consider to be important and what we consider unimportant. And therefore, even then, it was baffling that culture, the arts, and I'm going to add in and make a big shout out for creative industries, that those three key things, heritage, the arts, and the creative industries, really needed to be at the heart of the climate and nature crisis. Why? Because they gather us. Around them, we have different kinds of experiences, different ways of meaning. We speak to one another in very different vernaculars. They are everywhere. They are ubiquitous. And they speak very deeply to who we think we are. Heritage is around our stewardship. If there's one thing that speaks to values, it's heritage. So I think now there is a very, very important dialogue about how we steward our past, which is where justice comes in so centrally, our present, also justice, and what a future might look like. And of course, the creative industries, and the creative industries shape our world. They design the world around us. They reflect our lifestyles, and they also design our lifestyles. And they are absolutely critical that if we're going to drive an economy, it needs to be an economy that is green and that is fair. And the creative industries have a huge role to play in that. So we started 15 years ago. We started with the nuts and bolts of creative practice, initially in music, and then latterly much more widely. We now work all over the world with many art forms. And what we're seeing is an extraordinary shift taking place very quickly, I think prompted by the COVID pandemic, and latterly by the energy crisis that's being felt so profoundly, but also by deeper currents of change. The climate crisis, the nature crisis, and the justice crisis are combining to really ask us what it is that matters. We now have a very large resource of tools, resources, of knowledge, which is an invitation for people to really participate in making change through what they do, not through what they think. Because the second thing that really has pushed Julie's Bicycle on as an organization is recognizing that actually the cultural sector, just like any other, is its own ecosystem. It's not fair to leave the job of change down to artists and content creators. This is something that involves every single one of us, and every single one of us has agency and creativity to bring to this. One of the problems that we have with the arts and culture is we tend to valorize certain voices over others. Those voices often are the voices of our creators. We do a similar thing in the climate movement, which is to put far too much responsibility onto young people. Actually, that divests responsibility elsewhere. And whenever you put too much responsibility on one part of the system, in the culture and the arts, it's created very strong cult of celebrity, and it also takes us away, all of us away, from being agents of change. So we all need to act together. One of the things that I think is really important is to understand working on an ecosystem basis across culture is a fantastic invitation to do so much more than breathe into the opportunities that culture brings us, because I think we all recognize that culture has got an exponential capacity to drive change, both through what we do and also through our values. The good thing, though, is that over the last 15 years, I have seen extraordinary change. What we're not good at doing, though, is witnessing and celebrating that change. We're overwhelmed by difficult narratives. And actually, I would say that there is practice in pretty much every country on earth, creative practice, creative pioneers who are driving change, but they lack a cultural infrastructure. And so the project for culture becomes about how do you create a different kind of cultural system, a different kind of cultural infrastructure that enables this change to happen much more easily. And we have been very, very slow to recognize this as a cultural community at large, even though it's happening under our noses. And this is why it's so important that culture is represented fully and richly at the COP. One thing before I go into what happened at COP is the role of national policy. And this is something that Julie's Bicycle has been doing a lot of work in over the last decade, because in 2012, our Arts Council England, as Senator Bovey mentioned, made environmental reporting, an environmental policy, and an ongoing action plan, a funding requirement for all of their funded organisations. And Julie's Bicycle has had the honour of doing that work ever since. There've been a contract period, but we have been able to do it. And so what has happened is that it moved a response to climate from being a nice to have into a business critical issue. And this is what needs to happen. What that program has done, it's become much more ambitious over the years. We now have a very big cluster of major institutions following science-based targets in order to meet a net zero framework as quickly as possible. We have a huge amount of commissioning going on, and this adoption of how to create that sweet spot between forcing a change and inviting a creative participatory context has really moved the dial. And so we do have a climate literate sector, generally speaking, and it's had a huge range of other benefits to do with well-being, to do with campaigning and commissioning, and to do with creative output. These are the kinds of things that we need to do, and we have only just started that work in the context of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This is late. This is late to the party, and I think we need to ask ourselves a little bit about why we're late, because we really do need to show up. So I was asked to talk a little bit about what we did at COP, and Senator Bovey has already covered some of that, so forgive me for the repetition, but I'll whiz through. So I'm on the steering group for the Climate Heritage Network, which is a brilliant organization, a network, as Senator Bovey has said, of people from all over the world, network of organizations, grassroots organizations, right through to really major heritage communities. And what we've been doing is to work very closely with the technical, the technicalities of how you make sure that cultural heritage particularly is baked into the COP agreement. This year, we were invited into the Resilience Hub. This is part of the Blue Zone, which is where the negotiations take place, because Climate Heritage Network has joined the Race to Resilience campaign. So we curated a series of events in the Blue Zone of COP. And then we also did, as has been mentioned, a very big event in civil society. Could you pass on to the next slide, please? So before I go into it, I'm just going to frame the key takeaways of COP. The first is that we failed on really meeting the 1.5 limit on warming. 1.5 was a big subject for COP26 in Glasgow, and we are further away from that than ever. Currently, the pledges are above 2 degrees, edging to 3 degrees. This is catastrophic. We need to really understand that a 1.5 limit on warming is relatively, but not completely, for many communities, it's safe. 2 degrees is not, and 3 degrees is unimaginable. So we need to really breathe deeply into that ambition. We mustn't lose the Paris Climate Agreement, and it's looking very precarious at the moment. The second key takeaway was who wasn't there and why. There were 636 representatives of fossil fuel companies in Sharm el-Sheikh. That is more than any single country delegation. I've been to many COPs, and Glasgow had more actually, but Glasgow and Egypt, the presence of fossil fuel lobbyists, people whose interest it is to derail the fundamental goals of Paris, is an example of co-option, and we must resist it, because if we don't resist it, we need to ask what COP is all about, what it does, and we need to thoroughly question and call to account in whose interest these events are being held. The third thing to point out is that wealthy countries are still falling far short on financing adaptation and mitigation, and not just internally in their own economies and their own groups of economies, but also and in particular to the global south. The failure to deliver on the 2009 commitment of $100 billion per year to developing countries, which we agreed in 2009, by 2020, is a really damning indictment. It is a really poor indication of our failure of solidarity and our failure of commitment to people who have the least to blame and the most affected. And COP27 took place after the Pakistan floods. We need to ask ourselves what our priorities are. Therefore, the agreement repeats compromise language from last year, from COP26, to phase down unabated coal power and phase out inefficient fuel subsidies. Fossil fuel exporting countries successfully lobbied for to keep their vested interests intact. And the final text really disappointingly calls for countries to boost so-called low emission energy. That you can read that as being gas. Gas is a fossil fuel. So we've still got quite a lot of drift from away from renewable energy. And finally, the COP process has offered little evidence that this ritual of announcing new commitments yields the necessary progress on climate goals. I think COPs themselves, the structures of COP, really need to be re-examined, because although there have been some great successes, most notably the COP21, which produced the Paris Agreement in 2015, which was terrific. It was the first global agreement of its kind, and yet we're still not there. So we need to ask ourselves about the process itself. Will 2 weeks, whoever goes to a 2-week event, will a 2-week circus really produce what we need to do? Actually, we need to make sure that the COP process itself is rigorous, it has fundamental integrity. It might be that it needs to contract much more, but that it really keeps to the plan. And then those commitments, we are held to account the following year. Next slide, please. But the gain was, of course, the Loss and Damage Fund. Now, this fund we've been trying to get it for years and years and years. But what was really exciting about it wasn't just that the Loss and Damage Fund appeared, but it had cultural heritage at its heart. This was very significant because this was on African soil, this COP, as the next COP will be. And one of the things that the Climate Heritage Network brought was a group of 5 African heritage voices who were extremely vocal throughout the COP process and made the case for heritage as well as for African heritage really powerfully throughout the talks. This was very exciting for us because up until now, the human aspects of climate change and of nature loss and of justice have really been buried under the weight of science. We've seen that the IPCC has been moving towards a much more human-centered approach. The special report that was produced before COP in October did talk much more about climate justice. It talked about the effects on people and communities, the need for adaptation beyond mitigation much more vocally. So this was very, very significant that we had cultural heritage within that. Next slide, please. So the events, the first thing we did was take some civil space. I won't go into the story of what happened during the week at COP, but it was quite a tricky environment to work in. Egypt is a military state, and it's very important actually that we have, if on Egyptian soil, that we respect what is going on there, but that we also create a counter offering to civilians, to the people who live in Egypt and all the people who are coming in to COP, because culture is, above all, it is about democratic placemaking, it's about freedom of creative and artistic expression, and it's about an invitation to participate. So on the on the week before our Blue Zone event, we basically took over Sharm el Sheikh Museum, and we ran a day of talks, artistic expressions, music, dance, poetry, assembly, and a debate. And it was terrific, as Senator Bovey has said. It was a wonderful day. We had to keep it fairly low key. Originally, it was intended to take place outside Sharm el Sheikh, but then we had to relocate very quickly. But it did describe the many issues and the many points of connection that creativity and culture could provide. So what it did was to demonstrate how culture and the arts and the creative community could create a very different set of connections, meaning, and hard solutions to the climate challenge. We did have a huge number. It was opened by Sheikh Ahmed Abu Rashid, who is the Bedouin sheikh from the Jebel Air tribe that live around Sharm el Sheikh, and he blessed the land, opened the session with the blessing of the land, which was very significant. And then we had a day of performance and debate. This was followed the second week with a number of different interventions in the Blue Zone, small events that took each aspect of heritage and culture and debated it within that political sphere. Again, a very interesting deep dive into issues of culture, heritage, loss of heritage, within a political context, which was where the negotiations were taking place. A very powerful set of interventions. Can I have the next slide, please? These are some of the, well, these are the speakers. We had speakers from all over the world, very powerfully making the case for justice, for heritage, and for loss and damage, heritage to be part of loss and damage. And next slide, please. And then we had a high-level focus on culture-based climate action group, which, as Senator Bovey said, we had to lobby very hard for, but we finally made it. Princess Dana, Firas of Jordan, Andrew Potts, climate heritage coordinator, both did a terrific job in pulling together the political and the technical arguments which needed to go before ministers in order to get cultural heritage properly recognised. Next slide, please. And we got it. So next slide, please. I'm just going to give you. So this is the first time that the linkages between cultural heritage and climate change have been recognised by the UN Climate Convention. Explicit reference in the cover decision. This is really significant. The cover decision is the document that comes out of the COPs, and it's the big public document, the big public commitment. The reference on cultural heritage was included under the loss and damage fund paragraph. Again, hugely significant. Taken on African soil, the first step in a process to rectify the systemic injustice to billions of people, particularly in the global south, the least responsible for, but on the front lines of the climate crisis. This places culture and heritage firmly within the grasp of the loss and damage fund. So this is really, really important, and it felt very significant to put it there. However, we do, of course, need culture to be a cross-cutting theme. So not just under loss and damage, but under adaptation, under mitigation, and throughout all of the negotiations for COP. Next slide, please, because it is mentioned in other bits too. But I thought I'd show you this paragraph, which is where it sits. It notes with grave concern, this is the cover decision, the growing gravity, scope, and frequency in all regions of loss and damage associated with the adverse effects of climate change, resulting in devastating economic and non-economic losses, including forced displacement and impacts on cultural heritage, human mobility, and the lives and livelihoods of local communities, and underlines the importance of an adequate and effective response to loss and damage. So just to pause there, if museums, if heritage organisations, if networks, if communities ever needed a compelling reason to really focus hard on climate, on nature, and on justice as part of their core mission as really critical stewards of global, national, and local history, and of the present and the future, there you have it. It's absolutely critical that we take this challenge up and that we give this paragraph so that it doesn't become one of those lost statements in the COP cover decision, like so many are. That paragraph is given life and animation and is allowed to breathe into the rest of the COP commitment. Next one, please. COP27 also included tangible cultural heritage as a theme for a new framework on global goal for adaptation. It establishes traditional knowledge, knowledge of Indigenous peoples and local knowledge systems as a cross-cutting consideration, a really big shift. Again, that's an invitation to us all. And 3, please, next slide. And something that is called Surge, led by the COP27 presidency, was launched. This also is really important. It counts locally led and culture positive action as a guiding principle. It aims to support customized, localized approaches in the context of rapidly developing cities, while recognizing that culture and heritage are an asset both to be protected from climate impacts and a resource to strengthen communities in change. Another really, really important recognition of the role of culture and heritage in these rapidly urbanizing cities. That also applies to the cities to not so rapidly urbanizing. It applies to every city on earth, that our culture and our climate relationship needs to be deeply, deeply connected. And next slide, please. So what next? Well, conversations have already been underway around COP28 in the United Arab Emirates. What would we like? Well, we'd like something like a Dubai joint work on culture, some sort of framework. We want culture and cultural heritage. And I include in that, although the roles are very different, the role of the arts and the roles of the creative industries. We want them to be structural. That means to run across all the major COP themes. We want them to be operational, so that actually organizations like the Climate Heritage Network itself and all of those organizations, networks, individuals, communities that we represent actually have got the resources, the support, the witness, the championing, the understanding to operationalize the work that so many people have been doing for many years. We need it to be celebratory. We need to say that there is a vast community of new creative and cultural practice, which takes as its fundamental starting point values that celebrate Mother Earth, that care for and are respectful of justice, that are prepared to show solidarity where it needs to be felt more strongly, and to redesign and rethink and take a systems approach to our work, and to celebrate that. There is too much that is not allowing this movement, this mobilization that's happening all over the world to be felt. We need it to be high level. We don't want small, poorly attended side events. We want to be on the center stage, and not just an artist. We want the thematic of culture, heritage, arts, creativity to be represented at a high level point throughout the COP talks. We need it to be representative. That means one of the problems that arts and culture have, and this is not so much a problem with the museums, but certainly the arts, there are so many people who are sole traders, single artists, very small organizations. And some of those organizations are doing some of the most exciting work. We need to seek those communities out. We need to represent them really well. And we need them to be part of these high-level conversations. And finally, and very importantly, we need this work to be funded. We can only do so much unless we redivert resources that might be traditionally in certain places and make sure that they are going into the communities and the individuals that are really developing this practice. And that brings me on to a last point, which is to assure everybody on this call that they're there. So Julie's Bicycle has been working with people for well over a decade. They're in Canada. We're running creative climate leadership programs with some fantastic people in Canada right now. And if you look at the Climate Heritage Network membership, there are people all over the world, creative pioneers who have for years and years and years been developing the craft, the creativity and the commitment to present us with an invitation to do culture differently. And it's up to us to fund them and to celebrate them. Next slide, please. And I'll finish. So thank you for that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Alison, for this informative and thought-provoking presentation. I think there is so much for us to take back to our, work and teaching and programming and professional life. So thank you very much. I know that Sharon has joined us, so I would like to invite her. Hi, Sharon.
Hi, Shabnam.
Hi.
Senator Bovey, my COP partner.
How are you? Lovely to see you again.
You as well, Senator. You as well.
Okay.
I have to apologize for being late. I got back from Ottawa yesterday and had a bit of a family emergency and everything got shifted. So I'm really sorry that I'm late this morning, Shabnam. I feel terrible.
No worries. It's good you are here, but I hope everything is okay from your end.
Yeah, everybody's good.
That's good. That's really good. Thank you so much again for joining us, Sharon. So the floor is yours.
So Tansei Kiawao, Sharon Morin, Dishnakashin. I hail from Treaty 6 territory. I've been in many different territories over the last few weeks, so I'm just situating myself back at home. Live in Edmonton, Alberta. I worked in the museum field for 20 years. With the Musée Heritage Museum, working directly with Métis and First Nations and Inuit programming and history. And I now work for the Women of the Métis Nation, which is a national voice for Métis women across the motherland as a project coordinator. And we attended COP along with the Métis National Council. We were the first ever Métis delegation to go. Métis National Council and my organization, LFMO, or Women of the Métis Nation, have sent individuals before, but never have we gone as a delegation. And so it was really special to go with people from BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, and represent the voice of the Métis people across Canada. What we found, this was my first COP, the Egyptian, the one in Egypt was my first COP to ever go to. It was actually my first time ever being across the ocean. So it was quite a big thing for me to do. And I was rather nervous going there because I know the history and the laws that are in Egypt, and we were going with young folks that were from the 2S LGBTQ community that I thought were rather brave to go. In particular, a couple of our trans people who had been, if they had been arrested, could be arrested and jailed for up to 17 years. So they were putting their life in their hands going. So one of the first things I noticed there was the strength of the people that I was with. Most of them, or all of them, I will say we're young. I was the unofficial auntie and ended up being the official auntie at the end to all the ones that were there. They're all under 35. And carrying for me what I think are huge, heavy loads in their heart and in their mind about what we're doing with climate and how it's affecting them and how it's affecting their communities and their families. And so for me, it was a need for me to be there. I made sure that when I went, I took things like sage and tobacco pouches and that with me, because I knew that that would help. Just with grounding people, and I was looking that there would be situations that might be difficult to maneuver through. The youth were fantastic, and I must say that I was so proud to see all of our young women in ribbon skirts from all across the motherland, representing and showing who we are as culturally as Métis women. And most of the people that were there, a good chunk of them were young women that are taking on this role, and young folks that are 2S LGBTQ. So they carry that extra burden just being a woman and being from that other group, and trying to fit in and maneuver and having their voices heard. One thing I will say is it's imperative with culture and heritage that you have a strong Indigenous voice carried on through you. You can't just consult and have them with you. You must have them as part of the whole process. The voice of the Indigenous people is really the voice of the land. One of the things that myself and Dane D'Souza, who was with me from MNC, and Jen Piliplu, who's from MNA, started using the term, not knowledge, not Indigenous knowledge, it's our science. It's our science of living on the land. The academic books could not teach what you get from living off the land for 20 years. And so we have to make sure that we recognize that that science is equal to the sciences that are taught in the academic world. They're lifelong, generational teachings that have been taught for millennia. Your Chapans, who could be your 4th generation grandfather, taught all the way down, and you're learning those. So we really stress that within our presentations and who we were intermingling with, that we're not, it is knowledge, but it's a science. And so we want to start to change that kind of thought process and that talk and the word around it. I'm a knowledge keeper, and I cherish that term as being a knowledge keeper. But when I go out into the bush with Joyce and Jonas, they are teaching me things that I would learn in a science book or more. So it's the wording that we were really strong on. We had very good presentations from all of the Métis delegations, the Inuit delegations, and the First Nations. But one of the things that I found a little sad was that in the audience, it was primarily our people that were in the audience listening. It wasn't the other ones that should be in there listening to what we have to share. There was a really good presentation on water preservation and research that's been done here in Alberta with the fishermen and how the fish are changing in the waters and everything. And there wasn't anybody in there that was from outside of our organizations. And so that's one of the things that I would like to, try to push more, is to have more of everybody involved in what we're sharing and what we're teaching, because I think it's valuable. And I think that, for me, what I see there is I see the Indigenous people playing a big role, a huge role, and the youth playing a huge role in what we do with our climate and with our biodiversity. They're the ones that are going to make the change. They're the ones that are not going to go to COP after COP after COP and not see any action. They want action. They are action-based people, and they want it done. And I really see a lot of hope in them. I was very hopeful when I left COP after sitting with the young ones that I sat with. One of the other things that was mentioned was that when, in particular, when I did mine, both in Egypt and in Montreal, because I was at COP 15 too, was that they said our presentations were participatory. And I wasn't too sure what they meant, but as it was explained to me, what I did there was I was asked to share some teachings. So I shared teachings on the strawberries, and I shared some teachings on rocks. And usually what I was told from the Canadian delegation is that it's just, you just sit there and listen to the panel speak. You never have people interacting and doing things like that. And they really appreciated that. So I thought this morning what I would do, because spring is coming and I'm wearing my strawberry earrings. So I want to share with you and gift you some strawberry teachings that I have from wonderful grandmother Linda Boudreau Semegamus from St. Paul de Métis. And Linda is an elder within the Women of the Metis Nation. She's very traditional. She's been a Métis, fierce Métis warrior for many years. And I'm so blessed to have her in my life and sharing her teachings with me. So this was the one that we shared in COP, and it says, forever in our history, culture, and traditions, the strawberry has been known as the heartberry, and to represent the woman in our nation. This berry shows itself in the season of regrowth and renewal, spring, and represents the reproductive role of women in presenting new life and continuity. It represents a time when people have a chance to look at life, let go of things that have not served them, and to bring new growth and bring forth new change to ripen like a strawberry. Strawberry is the lead berry in our feasts. Like the women in our families, the strawberry is also prominent in the rites of passage or coming into womanhood. These ceremonies leads girls into new phases of womanhood. It represents the monthly cleansing that women experience that prepare to create new life. The heartberry also teaches the connections between the mind, body, spirit, and emotions in development in order to develop personal balance. We need our heart to lead us and help us and grow. Strawberry plants have strong, widespread root systems, which allows them to grow and flourish like a small family system. The sweet, small berry is intricately intertwined into a woman's life. And then this is Linda's saying, she says, when women gather, healing begins. And Linda does that rite ceremony. I'm going to go do that with my granddaughter this summer with her. And it's just a special little thing. And so that was what they called participatory. I read Linda's and shared Linda's teachings. In Montreal, I did the rock teaching, and I made sure everybody got a rock. We went out and bought rock. We had to buy them in Montreal, which was really bad. Because there's not a lot of natural space around there where we were at. So we went and bought rocks. But it was really fun because I had the president of the David Suzuki Foundation in there. And we did a panel discussion with some of our young folks, and I hosted, and we had one of our grandmothers up there, Kathy Boston, and that was the first time we brought a grandmother with us to COP. And she did the blessings for us and was there for the youth, and was just really nice to have her there. And so what we did was we passed our container around with the rocks, and everybody got to choose their own rock. And then I started to tell them about the rock and told them, you got to hold your rock and you got to love your rock, and you got to make sure that rock gets nice and warm in between your palms. And I always like to rub it kind of hard and give it a good feel and scrub off anything that's on there that should not be on there, because I think rocks can hold power. And as you hold your rock, I want to teach you that rocks are the oldest beings. And actually in Quebec, and I thought was really good, because I did see on a David Suzuki nature of things that some of the oldest rocks in the world are in Quebec. And so I told them, I said, they're so old. I said, rocks are so old that they have no eyes and they have no mouth, but they have ears. And you keep that rock in your hand. And if you want to give somebody some love and have them feel secure, you love that rock up and you think about that and you give that to that person. And then they in turn will have that power in that rock. And so we're gifting that and sharing that and carrying that on. And so rocks are, and then the gentleman that taught me that, Jerry Wood, he said, and Jerry was what he called himself a contrary. So he did a lot of things in a contrary way, in a words kind of way. But he said he always had 3 rocks in his pocket, and they were his worry rocks. You know, we've heard of worry dolls around the world and things like that. These were his worry rocks. And he said when he went to Thailand, he said they tried to take his rocks out of his pocket. They didn't want him to take them, but he was able to keep his 3 rocks with him. So, I mean, it's something that just grounds us, right? And keeps us. So when I was in Egypt, I made sure that when I spoke, and it was so interesting to see here in the last presentation of the Bedouin, and I didn't make it that day to the museum. I was busy doing something else. But the Bedouin chief doing the land acknowledgement, you know, and I made sure that when I went and talked, that I honored that land and talked about how grateful we were to be on that ancient land. You know, I think it's important that regardless of their political plight or whatever is going on, that we acknowledge that land that we're on, because it's not the land that is doing that, it's the people that are doing that. And we are there to protect the land and the air and the waters and so forth. So that's kind of my way of thinking about it. Politics are one thing, and I experienced and seen some pretty crazy things with regards to security and that. But I don't hold that against the land. And we are the stewards of that land. And I think it's really important that when we go to these different places that we take the time. You know, there was a water ceremony done in Egypt from the women from Wisconsin. You know, there was the cultural activity that took place at the museum. You know, we were able to have sanctioned protests. The picture behind me is from one of the protests, and that's the story. I'll finish off with those stories in my presentation of those. But you know, that's all we have is our voice and the land. And so I think we carry a big load, and that's why I wanted to be there for the youth and help them, because it was so important. So we went with many different people. One of the girls that stayed with us, and we went in shifts because we couldn't afford to go the whole time. So there was one group that went the first week or so, and then we were there the last part. And Jordy was with us, and Jordy's from MNO, Metis Nation of Ontario, and she's a clinical psychologist. And so I was just following them around, going to the different side events. And I will say the side events that I went to were very well attended. I was quite impressed with them. But we went to one on mental health and women. They were saying mental health and gender is what they were saying, and discovering that gender to them is only women. So that was a little bit of and it shouldn't have shocked me, but it did. I thought it was a UN thing. I thought it would be a little different, I think. But anyway, we go in there, and Jordy gets up and she's asking some questions around gender diversity and things like that. And they are not really answering her there. And it's all women on the panel from across the world, including a young woman from Canada. And then this young person who I had noticed before in other sessions that we were on, got up and said, "My name is so-and-so, and I'm from BC, and I'm a transgender person, and I don't see any representation of me here. Why is it only just women? We are diverse," went on saying all of this stuff, and was crying while they were saying it. That person had nobody beside them. They were sitting in the front row all by themselves, because everybody else had and that person sat right in the very front row, right in front of the stage, and got up there and identified as a trans person. Tell you, I was crying. I could not believe the power that person had and the strength that person had. Myself, Jordy, Jen, and Dane, who were all there, and this person was an Indigenous person too, because I'd seen them in the Indigenous Peoples Caucus. We all went up and surrounded that person. And that's where I got one of my rocks out, and I got some tobacco out, and I gave it to them. And they said, what am I supposed to do with it? And I said, when you get back to Egypt, I said, you go and take all of that energy that's in that tobacco and you go burn it. You know, because you want to keep positivity around there. So you burn that negativity and just take the positive that you got out of coming to Egypt. But I thought, how can you send somebody into a situation like that and not have them supported? That's the thing that got me, was that that person did not have the support that they needed at that time. So we went on our day. We had some really fun times. We made sure that we went into the town and visited the old market. We did not go to the Nama Bay, which is kind of like we called the West Edmonton Mall of it. We went into the old market. We wanted to be with the cultural people. We wanted to experience all that. And we had some marvelous experiences in some of the stores. We walked into this one store and there was a young man in there who had these really awesome lamps that he made, and he cuts out all the shapes. So when it shines, it gives the design on the wall or the floor or whatever. And he had it on his dirt floor and he's showing us the design. And I look up and there's these beautiful Egyptian guitars hanging up on the wall there. And I said, oh, I said, those are beautiful. He says, I make those. I'm like, what? You make them? He takes it down and he proceeds to serenade us with this beautiful music. I wanted to get my phone out and record him, but I thought, how disrespectful is that? You know, I just wanted to hear him. So we had that experience in the store, you know, and then we went into another store and this gentleman told us about how he gathers all the herbs, and like he had the teas there, right? So he's telling us all the teas and what they were used for and everything. So, I mean, just going and connecting with them to show that, you know, like we're here to be part of your world too. You know, we're not here to, I was not there to judge or anything like that. I just wanted to experience what they had and then share some of us. And I started sharing about like the strawberries and the mint tea, because they have mint tea. My mom was a senator and my mom got to go to Morocco and she got to experience the tea ceremony in Morocco. And it's mint tea, and she came back and she was just fascinated. We talked about that. So I shared that with that gentleman there, and he talked about their tea ceremony that he did. So it was really amazing. You know, and then we go back to the events, you know, and we're stuck in with 40,000 people. And you have these side events, and they have a side event for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And I was like, wow, you know, I was surprised. I think that they would have that as a side event to be, or as a sanctioned event, a sanctioned protest, I guess what it is, on missing and murdered Indigenous peoples. And it was outside. And the one thing that I noticed was the people from all around the world. Every continent was represented in that circle of people that were there. And then almost every person from those continents started to get up and talk about their missing and murdered Indigenous people. And I was floored. I thought that was a North American, South American kind of thing. But it happens in Australia. It happens in Asia. It happens in Indonesia. It happens in Africa. It happens everywhere. And that's the expense of those big energy companies going in. That's the expense that we are paying as Indigenous peoples. Our land defenders, our ones that are out there working the man camps and trying to make a living, are the ones that are putting their lives in danger. And we can't forget those people. I had a very interesting teaching in Montreal about three-eyed seeing. We all talk about, you know, we've all kind of heard about two-eyed seeing, you know, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. Well, I learned about three-eyed seeing and how we have to be the voice for those that can't or don't or won't or don't have the ability to use their voice. We have to be their voice for them. So those ones that are, you know, I think of the ones that are out in BC, those women, they're all women out there defending the land. You know, we have to be the other voice for them. We have to make sure that we're speaking for Mother Earth. We're speaking for the four-leggeds and the two-leggeds and the ones with wings, and the ones with fins. Because if we don't, then who will? And that's where those Indigenous kind of teachings come in, because that's how we think. We have this word called Wakotwin. Wakotwin. And Wakotwin means we are related to everything. The blade of grass, the ladybug on that blade of grass, the tree that's standing by that blade of grass, they're all my relations. The berries are my sisters. The rocks are my elders. So, I haven't always thought that way. I mean, I've always been raised in a Métis kind of cultural way, and knowing the land, but really the Wakotwin teachings have come as I've gotten older, and that commitment to that. And so, I take that commitment and I put that commitment with the youth that are going out and doing that work, the commitment that I have to supporting them and being their official auntie, and the commitment that I have to the Métis motherland and the Métis Nation, and representing and making sure that our voices are heard. It's an amazing time right now to see what's happening with climate and the Indigenous voices and the youth voices. And I know I haven't been around but I've followed and I've watched. And I did see this year that there's hope, and there is a possibility of change, and there's a possibility of action. My mom used to say, talk's cheap, takes money, we need that finance in there. We need to be able to do that. I was in Global Affairs yesterday, they were all talking on climate finance and everything. It was very interesting, because I still hear a lot of talk that I would not find acceptable towards Indigenous people. And I had to call people, I had to say something at the end of it. So we have to be really mindful. But the Indigenous people, the Indigenous community, the people that I know, the young folks that I know, they're here for the long run. They want to do this work. They want to be part of the change. We just have to make sure that they're brought in to be part of that change. All of them that I were interacting with are university students. Every one of them are in there doing something with climate change, climate justice, law, all of that stuff. So let's bring them in. Let's give them a chance. Let's use their knowledge. Let's have them share, and we, accept and love and learn from them. And let's make this Mother Earth what she's supposed to be. She's sad. She's sad right now, and she's hurting. And she's crying, and we see this in the weather. She's mad that we're abusing her like this. I mean, humanize her. Would we treat our mother like that? We would never do that. If we humanize what we're doing and what we're interacting with, and we can do that with Mother Earth, then we take more of a conscious action and awareness of what we're doing and how we're treating her. And I know for some people that's like way kind of out there kind of thinking, but it's actually really simple thinking. It really is. We just treat her with respect. And that's the point that we can all get out to everybody. Because I know pretty much everybody on here probably thinks the same way as I do when it comes to climate and changing the way people think about climate. The last thing I'll share is my last story about the MMIW event. So during the week, we had been interacting with all the youth, and I met this young person who I just connected with right away. And we started talking and realized that she's from my home area of Slave Lake, Wabasca. And she's part of this family that I was very close to, best friends kind of thing, And so, right away, it's like, Auntie, and I'm like, oh, my niece, kind of thing. And her name is Segwin. Segwin's trans as well, too. And so we're at the event, and it's kind of winding down, and different people from different parts of the world are coming in and talking. They had a youth group from Ontario, doing a drum song. They had a Brazilian woman up there, you know, with an interpreter. Same with an Indonesian woman up there with an interpreter talking about things. African women, African sisters stand with Indigenous women in solidarity. You know, it was really positive and powerful. And Seguin gets up at the end and she says, she said, I'd like you all to put your cameras down. She says, and I know some of you won't. She says, but I'm asking you if you would. She says, because I'm going to take my hands in my life right now. Or my life in my hands, I should say. And she said, my name is Seguin and I come from Canada and I'm a transgender person. And I'm here because and she works with a climate organization in BC, and she explained while she was there, but she also explained why she thought she needed to be there. She thought that she needed to make a point of being there to show that she can go anywhere and other people should be able to go anywhere. But she did this while there was security standing over there with these tablets filming us. You know, and there's guys walking around with the little headphone things in their ears and their blue suits. So we know it's security, like they're very, very obvious. And she speaks her truth. And I'm standing on kind of like, I'm standing close watching her. And then as she leaves the circle, I get out of my area and I go around and I go to her and I put my arms around her and I hug her. And as I'm doing this, I just see this whole group of young Indigenous women in their ribbon skirts come and they all circled us. And it was just like this really powerful circle of strength. And I thought, boy, if we could do this with everything that we do, we could make it really far. So, I mean, I just left there really inspired by our youth, really inspired by the Indigenous community from around the world, and really hopeful to go back and make more of an impression on the world and be more of a presence within COPs to come. And yeah, I think that's it, Shabnam.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I truly appreciate the teachings you have shared with us, your experiences, you know, not just attending the events, but also immersing yourself in the culture and in the market and connecting with people. As you say, it's about people and it's human. And I actually wanted to appreciate sharing of Linda's strawberry teaching with us. I saw someone had this strawberry through there, so thank you so much. Thanks to all of our panelists. I turn it over to Laurie now to take us.
Thanks very much, Shabnam. My name is Laurie Smith. I'm speaking to you from Ottawa, which is in the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe people. And I would just like to echo Shabnam's comments by saying what a spectacular series of presentations that was. I'm really blown away by you three strong women, each speaking from your own unique perspective. I think you've really given us a tremendous insight into what happened at COP27, but also what is happening elsewhere on this front, and some really clear ideas about where to go from here and what steps we could take and what sort of I was going to say frame of mind, but also frame of heart to proceed with. So I really want to, I really am blown away by the presentations. But I have a more mundane task today. I'm just here to moderate the question and answer part of our session. So as we mentioned before, if you'd like to ask a question, just to keep things within a good time frame, if you could put it in the chat, and I will pick it up from there. So pose your question in the chat. And if you want to ask a particular question to a particular presenter, please let me know. And also, if you can either include your name, if your name is already there as part of your Zoom identity, that's great. And if it's not, if you can just add in your name. I don't want to ask anonymous questions. So while I'm just waiting for questions to be posted, I know that was a lot to think about. It may take a few minutes to put your thoughts into words. I'd like to turn to Claudine Diom, who is on our core team, and Claudine has a question or a few questions to start us off with. today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lori. And thank you to our three speakers for sharing so generously your stories and remarks. They were not only instructive, but very powerful and inspiring. And I too am so pleased that you could join us today and in admiration of your generosity. I have a question for probably the three speakers, Alison, Senator Bovey, and Sharon. Nice to meet you, Sharon. You are three women from different backgrounds, different experiences, with different expertise. And I think that culture is your common denominator for all three. And before in her presentation, Alison referred to culture as an ecosystem. And you underscored, Alison, the importance for the art, well, for all of us to act together. And my understanding is that we are the art and culture and heritage sector. We are. I think the CHN acts as a wonderful gatherer of all that expertise and knowledge. But I'm wondering, how do we move forward in a perhaps an increased cohesion between our different areas of expertise, interests, and activities, and to pass along our message in a more positive, strengthful, and assertive way? Are there obstacles that we need to overcome to strengthen our position? And what would they be in your view? Thank you.
Shall I start with that? Was that?
Well, I think that's, you seem to be the one willing to jump in, Alison, so please do.
Happy to. I mean, such a great question. And I think we all, the answer to that really in some ways is the heart of the matter. I think probably just to sort of slightly shift what brings us all together. It is culture, but I think underneath that it's love, it's care, it's respect, it's appreciation, it's solidarity. And the job is much deeper than putting culture, whatever that means, because it's a freighted term. It's also, hugely, some people use it for some things and some people use it for other. I think the opportunity, the invitation is really to speak much more deeply to ourselves, as one, and to one another, as Sharon said, to our the four-legged ones, two-legged ones, the eight-legged ones, those with wings, those with fins. Because nothing less is enough. And I suspect that what we've all done, and again, Sharon, you referred to this, and I know that Senator Bovey feels this too, that actually the deeper you go into this, the more you learn to appreciate that this really is the place in which our souls rest. So it's a privilege, it's an honor. And I think that that's both an exhortation to become part of this, but to go on that journey, which carries with it a lot of grief, a lot of loss, a lot of pain, a lot of self-realization. But actually, that's the job that needs to be done now. That is the nature of this challenge. So I suppose the short answer to that is that it takes all that range and that dynamic range of both emotional feel and sensuality, but also that a deep dive into intimacy, hyperlocal work, as well as that big offering from Mother Earth to do something that is profoundly meaningful. Therefore, everything matters, every choice matters, every act of solidarity matters. There's no one way. What is a mobilization? It's where a mobilization is where everybody steps in to themselves, to one another, and to Mother Earth. So I can, when we talk about ecosystems, why I say that, and I don't want it to be facile, because it is a very important concept. It is really recognizing that everybody has a part to play in this, and not in relation to themselves, it's in relation to everything around them that is where it really matters. And I think that is a nurturing place. I don't think it's any coincidence that this movement is being led by women. It is, there is no question about that. And I think it's because there is a much easier orientation to love and kindred in it. And that's what is so brilliant about being part of this. I think Sharon said that. Sharon, just in terms of solidarity, I haven't always understood this very well either. And I can just say to everybody, if you're not involved in this, it is going to be the journey of your lifetime. It is a place of such love and hope. So yeah, if you're not in it, I'm very envious because you've got a great path in front.
Perhaps I can add to that now, and I think Alison, you got us off to a good start on this question. It's a very deep question, and I want to go back to the meaning of the word culture. We all know about agriculture, and a former chair of a writer, a playwright, a former chair of the board of the Canada Council for the Arts, and the first chair of the British Columbia Arts Council, was a wonderful man by the name of Mavor Moore, and was a very close friend. And Mavor, in speaking to the British Columbia Union of Municipalities back in the late 1970s, pointed out that the word culture, its Latin roots, means to grow. That's your agriculture, and on it goes. And he defined culture, the role of arts and culture, as being to grow people. We grow our communities, we grow people, which I think is very, very true. And in bringing all this together, some of you will know for many years I taught at the University of Winnipeg, and I taught the history of Canadian cultural policy. And so I'd start the class by asking them, first lecture, what does the word culture mean? And when we had Indigenous students in the class, it was a very, very rich conversation. When we didn't, it was a very tough conversation. But what made it so rich with Indigenous students in the class was that right away, without missing a beat, I'd hear culture equals the land. The land houses us, the land gives us our tools, the land gives us our food, and therefore we need to respect that land. And I think that's what I'm calling for when I'm wanting everybody as individuals, as their organizations, as their communities. It is the way we live our lives, where we are, the way we celebrate where we are, that is the soul of who we are, the soul of person, the soul of place, the soul of being. And that's what we need to bring together. And very tangibly, I think, as I said earlier, museums and arts organizations have a huge ability to do that. And some are doing it brilliantly. I want all to do it, right? And I want us not to do it just by looking at what happened or what was our history. It's really important, don't get me wrong, but we have to put a futuristic lens on it as well. We have to be able to look forwards and backwards simultaneously and pull out what the tools are going to be that we need to grow our communities. The other thing, wearing my current hat, my legislative hat, as being a member of a chamber that's supposedly here for sober second thought, that's why I developed this declaration respecting the essential role of artists and creative expression in Canada. It is to foster that link between arts and culture and health and the environment and crime prevention and education and the economy, the whole 9 yards, right? That's really, really important. And it's with great sadness that many of you know that the sponsor of this bill in the House of Commons, who was Jim Carr, a former minister, a musician, the founder of the Manitoba Business Council, man of many, many talents, He died in December. So this bill is now without, though it passed the Senate unanimously, it's in the House of Commons at the moment without a sponsor. And that's going to be a huge challenge, but we're going to rise over that challenge, because until we understand the importance of the connectivity of our creative minds in whatever discipline they work in, whatever their cultural background, until we understand that connectivity and we can bring that connectivity together, we're not going to move the needle far enough. And that's why I agree with Alison. We've got to get at future COPs, the arts and cultural and creative sector has to be front and center, not offsite and having to get to the center. Yes, we're in the documents. I'm thrilled. I wanted us there in a firmer way in an earlier drafts we were.
Thank you, Senator Bovey and Alison. Sharon, would you like to make a comment on that? We have about 5 minutes left and then we'll be wrapping up, but so sorry to rush you, but I want to hear your voice. I really do.
No, it's a little hard to follow those two ladies. I'll
Yeah.
tell you that. Wow. I just thought, when Senator Bovey was talking about the future and the past, I just thought of 7 generation teachings, and we have to look at the 7 generations coming up and we have to learn from the 7 generations from the past. And I see how it all just intertwines together, we have these big, words and thoughts and everything, but it just boils down to really, simple kind of teachings. So that's what I, would share is those 7 generation teachings. And thank Alison and Senator for their great thoughts and, all of that. It's just amazing. Thank you so much.
You guys are perfect. It's like you scripted this ahead of time. I just love the balance between the comments here. I'm going to hand it back to Shabnam so she can close us off for the afternoon. And thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Laurie, and thanks again, everyone. I just took a lot of notes, a lot of things for us to, as a group, we will take them back and we'll, talk about them in our smaller group later on. But this is huge, and I really appreciate your honest, frank, and hopeful remarks, as well as sharing the truth about your experiences attending the events. I'm new to the COP conversation, so I'm learning about all of this is happening around the world. So this is not a small task for all of us. And I should admit that we are coming to this space from a very academic perspective. So connection with the practice and the reality and the policy behind all of this is critical for us. Because when we started these talks among 3 organizations, we wanted to do something in heritage education, in the programming, in our courses. And it's very difficult for us to understand where to start. It's a huge task, and we have limited number of hours in each course to talk about these matters, but it's urgent and it's really critical. So we are really looking forward to continuing this conversation and coming up with some solid plans in terms of preparing the next generations who are going to be continuing this conversation, because we know that there are gaps in knowledge areas and what's happening in reality and practice. So that's the essence of what we are hoping to achieve here. But thanks again, Senator Bovey, Alison, and Sharon, for generously, giving us your time, sharing your thoughts, experiences, and your hopes for the future. We are hoping that you'll keep in touch. And I really wanted to appreciate everyone who took their Saturday morning, evening, afternoon off and joined us this morning. Thanks to our participants. As we shared in the beginning, we are going to post a recording of this session on the JT-HECA website, and the links are, I think, in the chat. I think that's it for us, unless anyone has any final thoughts or remarks. I think we can wrap it.
May I just say a heartfelt thank you to all of you for organizing this, everybody who listened to what we had to say, and what a treat it is to be with Sharon and Alison again. And if I may say, I think what you've given is a wonderful foundation for this collective work that we all need to do in a constructive way. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And there are lots of thank yous and nice words coming in the chat. So thank you again, everyone. Take care, be well, and have a good day, good evening. Thank you.